My aunt laughed at me. "You'll never afford a house, you're hopeless," she said while everyone stared. I smiled and left quietly, and a year later I invited them all to my new place. I can still hear the sound of her laughter, the kind that isn't meant to be shared but meant to pierce. That night had started so normal, just a family dinner in my Aunt Linda's dining room. The smell of roasted chicken and buttered rolls clung to the air, the clinking of cutlery and small talk filling the spaces between us. I thought it was just another evening of smiling politely and getting through it. But then it happened. Linda leaned back in her chair, eyes locked on me as if I had been holding in some long-kept joke she was ready to reveal. "You'll never afford a house," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice rang like a bell in the quiet room. "You're hopeless!" At first, I thought she was joking. I let out a small laugh, hoping the moment would pass, but her lips curled, and she repeated it, slower this time, as though each word needed to cut a little deeper. "Hopeless," she said, and then she laughed, full-bodied, throwing her head back while the entire table fell into a stunned silence. I glanced around. My mother looked down at her plate, my uncle fiddled with his napkin. No one said a word. The room grew heavy with that awful, suffocating tension, the kind where you start to hear your own heartbeat. Something inside me cracked, but on the surface, I smiled. I swallowed every word I wanted to say, stood up quietly, and said, "Thank you for dinner." Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give her the satisfaction of watching me crumble. But as I walked to my car in the cold, January air, her words echoed in my head, over and over, cutting deeper with every step. Hopeless. And that was the night everything changed. Driving home that night, the roads blurred in front of me. I didn't even turn the radio on. All I could hear was her voice, laughing. "You'll never afford a house. You're hopeless." I wish I could say I brushed it off, that I had thicker skin than that. But the truth is, those words found something already fragile inside me and pressed hard on it. I had been drifting for a while, working a job that barely covered rent, watching friends move on with their lives while I stayed stuck. Maybe that's why she said it. Maybe she saw it before I did. When I got home that night, I sat in the dark for a long time. The apartment was silent, just the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of a streetlight outside my window. I kept replaying that moment around the table, every glance, every uncomfortable silence. I thought back to little things from earlier that evening that I hadn't paid attention to. The way she asked me, with that syrupy sweetness, "So, how's life in your little place? Still renting?" The way my cousin avoided my eyes as if he knew what was coming. And then I realized, she had been building up to it all night. Every casual question was a setup. I just hadn't seen it. By the time the clock on my wall ticked past midnight, I was still sitting there, still staring at the blank wall, feeling smaller than I had in years. But somewhere in that stillness, a strange clarity came over me. It wasn't anger. It was a decision. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it in the room. Never again. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be the guy they pitted anymore. The next morning, I woke up different. Not stronger yet, just aware. There's a point where humiliation turns into something sharper, like a splinter you can't ignore. That dinner had been my splinter. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hair sticking up, the same tired face I'd seen for years, and I asked myself a simple question. Are you going to prove her right? The answer came quick. No. I made a list that day on a torn envelope. Not goals, not yet. Just things I refused to accept anymore. No more excuses. No more wasting weekends scrolling on my phone. No more waiting for someone to hand me an opportunity. It sounds dramatic now, but that list became my starting point. I began looking at my life like a leaking roof. Where's the hole? Where's the next one? How do I patch it? That evening, after work, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down exactly what I earned, what I spent, and what was left. It wasn't much. But staring at those numbers, I realized something. If I kept living the way I was, Aunt Linda would always be right. So I did something that surprised even me. I picked up my phone, opened the job listings, and started applying to everything that would let me work evenings and weekends. Driving, delivering, stocking shelves, I didn't care. By midnight, I'd send out 27 applications. And that was how it began, not with a big plan, but with one raw, desperate decision. Work until there was no room left for people like her to laugh at me again. Within a week, the second job came through, warehouse night shifts. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I took it without thinking twice. So my days became a loop. Office job from 8 to 5. Quick dinner. Then straight to the warehouse until 2 in the morning. Sleep a few hours. Repeat. The first month nearly broke me. I'd drive home at night with my hands cramping from lifting boxes, my eyes gritty from exhaustion. But when I got home, instead of collapsing, I'd sit at my kitchen table and teach myself things. I found free online courses, coding, budgeting, anything that might open a door somewhere. Every night, I would whisper to myself like a mantra, not hopeless. Not hopeless. I cut everything that wasn't essential. No takeout. No new clothes. If something broke, I fixed it. I sold old stuff I didn't need, video games, furniture, anything that could turn into savings. It was brutal, but it was freeing too. Every dollar I saved felt like a step away from that dining table, from that laughter. Friends started to notice I wasn't around as much. At first, they thought I was mad at them. I wasn't. I just couldn't afford distractions anymore. And slowly, very slowly, I began to see numbers change in my account. At first, it was just a few hundred. Then 1,000. Then a few thousand. There were nights when I'd stare at those numbers and picture a front porch, a key, a door that was mine. I wanted that more than sleep. By the spring, something inside me shifted. The exhaustion was still there, but it carried a purpose now. I started to plan. I met with a financial advisor, a guy named Peter who didn't sugarcoat anything. "You're still a ways off," he said, looking at my accounts. "But you're on the right track. Keep this up, and you can do it sooner than you think." That single sentence kept me going. And so I doubled down. I found weekend work helping a carpenter with small projects. At first, I just held boards and handed him tools, but soon he taught me how to measure, cut, and build. It wasn't just extra cash. I was learning how to fix things with my own hands. Later, those skills would come in handy in ways I couldn't have imagined. I kept all of this to myself. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want pity or fake encouragement. This was between me and that voice in my head. One night, after an especially grueling double shift, I stopped at a late-night diner. I sat there alone with a cup of coffee, looking like someone the world had already forgotten. And that was the moment I realized something. I wasn't forgotten. I was building. Quietly. Every insult she'd thrown at me was turning into fuel. I wasn't just saving for a house. I was saving for the day I could walk into a room full of the same people who thought I'd never make it, and let the walls do the talking for me. By the time summer came around, I'd been running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night for months. It's a strange thing, exhaustion. It stops feeling like tiredness and starts feeling like a layer of fog over your entire life. But beneath that fog, I could feel something solid growing, a rhythm, a kind of momentum. One afternoon, I walked into the bank with a folder so thick it looked like it might split open. Pay stubs from 3 jobs, bank statements showing every dollar I hadn't spent, tax forms, all of it. The loan officer, a kind-eyed woman named Susan, flipped through page after page. Finally, she glanced up and said, "You've been busy." "Trying," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She typed on her computer for what felt like forever, and then, just as casually as if she was telling me the weather, she said, "You qualify for pre-approval." I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there as the words sank in, and then I felt my throat tighten. For a second, I thought I might cry right there in front of her. Instead, I nodded, smiled, and gripped the edge of her desk like I was holding on to the edge of a cliff. It still didn't mean I had a house. But for the first time in my life, it meant I could. The hunt began. Every weekend after my warehouse shifts, I would tour houses. Some were so bad I laughed out loud when I walked in. Others were perfect but way out of reach. I kept reminding myself, I didn't need perfect. I needed mine. It was in early autumn, after a long Sunday of visiting places that smelled like mildew, that I found it. A small two-story on a quiet street, with a wraparound porch and just enough wear on it to scare away anyone looking for easy. The realtor apologized for the peeling paint, for the old fixtures. But all I could see was possibility. I ran my fingers over the wood banister, already imagining how I'd sand it down. I walked into the living room and saw the light spilling across the floor like it was waiting for someone to just notice it. By the time I got to the upstairs window, I knew. "This is the one," I said quietly, more to myself than to the realtor. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork, inspections, and late-night panic about whether everything would fall apart. But it didn't. On a gray November morning, just a few days before the anniversary of that dinner, I stood in front of that same house, signed the last page, and the keys landed in my hand. For a long time, I just stood on that porch, staring at the door, thinking about how far I had come from that January night when I drove home humiliated and empty. And then I unlocked it. The echo of the door opening was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The first night in that house, I slept on the floor. No furniture, no curtains, just me and the walls. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling, every creak in the wood sounding like a heartbeat, and I thought I did this. No one else. Me. The very next morning, I started making it my own. I had barely any money left after the down payment, so everything had to be done with my own hands. The skills I'd picked up from that carpenter suddenly became my lifeline. I painted the walls myself, patched holes, tore up old carpet, and sanded the wooden floors until they glowed. On weekends, I bought second-hand furniture, refinished it, and carried it in piece by piece. The place began to change. Every room became a kind of answer to that laugh. The kitchen, bright and clean, where I could cook for myself without hearing someone criticize me for still renting. The small study at the back of the house, filled with books and a desk I built with my own hands. And the living room, my favorite, warm, open, a place that felt like belonging. Neighbors would wave when I came back from the hardware store, arms full of supplies. Some of them offered help. I always smiled and said, "I've got it." Because this wasn't just a house, it was a statement I needed to make to myself. Somewhere in those months, an idea began to take shape. It started as a quiet thought and grew with every stroke of paint, every nail I hammered. A dinner. Not just any dinner. A year to the day after the night I walked out of Aunt Linda's house, I would invite them all here. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I kept it casual in the invitations. I'd love to host a special family dinner. It's important to me that everyone comes. There were no hints. No talk of a new house. I wanted the surprise to be whole. By December, the house was ready. The last thing I finished was the guest room. It was the largest, with a big window and a bed I built myself. I made it perfect, not just for me, but for the moment I'd been imagining since the night everything began. The night of the dinner came with a clear, cold sky. I'd been ready for weeks, but that afternoon, as I laid out the silverware and checked everything one last time, my hands shook a little. This wasn't just a meal. It was a reckoning. At exactly 6 o'clock, headlights appeared in the driveway. First my parents, then my cousins, and finally Aunt Linda, stepping out of her car in a heavy coat, scanning the street with a puzzled frown. They all thought we were meeting at a restaurant. The directions I'd given them had been vague enough that none of them realized it until they pulled up. When they reached the porch, they hesitated. "Whose place is this?" my uncle whispered, glancing at the house. I opened the door before they could knock. "Welcome," I said, smiling. There was a strange pause as they stepped inside. They looked around, high ceilings, polished wood, the smell of a roast cooking in the kitchen, and confusion began to settle over their faces. "This is yours?" my mother asked. I nodded. "All mine." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even my cousins, who always had something smart to say, just stood there, looking like they had walked into another world. Then Aunt Linda gave a short laugh, like she thought maybe this was some kind of joke. "You're kidding," she said. I smiled. "Not at all. Let me show you around." I started the tour. The living room first, bright and warm, with bookshelves I built myself. Then the kitchen, where the smell of rosemary and garlic made everyone's stomachs rumble. Every room I showed them was a quiet reminder of the year they hadn't seen, the long nights, the work, the quiet rebuilding. No one said much. They just followed, their shoes soft on the polished floors, their eyes wide. And with each step, their silence grew heavier. I saved the biggest room for last. As we climbed the stairs, the house was so silent you could hear the creak of every step. The hallway was narrow, lined with framed photos I had taken during those long months, a little reminder of where I'd been. I stopped at the last door on the right. This, I said, my hand on the knob, is my favorite room. I pushed it open slowly. The room was large, light pouring in from a wide window that faced the street. The walls were soft blue, the kind of blue that makes a room feel like a calm exhale. In the center stood a bed I had built myself, its headboard smooth, the quilt perfectly folded. Fresh flowers sat in a glass vase on the dresser, their scent delicate in the quiet air. Everyone stepped in behind me, one by one. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My uncle whispered something I couldn't catch. Even my cousins, who usually scrolled on their phones whenever they were bored, just stood there, looking around, their faces giving away a kind of awe they couldn't hide. I turned to Aunt Linda. She stood a little apart from everyone else, her expression unreadable. This room, I said, keeping my voice steady, is for guests. I thought it would be nice to have a comfortable place for anyone who might need a little time to rest. I let that sink in. Then I smiled. Aunt Linda, I saved it for you, I said softly, for the next time you get tired of laughing at people. The words landed like a pin dropping in the middle of a quiet theater. She blinked. For a second, I could see the moment she remembered it, the dining table a year ago, the way she laughed, the silence around her. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The room stayed absolutely still. Behind her, my parents shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked down. My uncle cleared his throat, his face red. And my cousins? They were staring at the floor, suddenly very interested in the pattern of the rug. Linda's eyes flicked around the room as though she wanted to find an escape, but there wasn't one. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just smiled at her calm and said, "Shall we go have dinner?" Then I walked out, leaving her standing there in the guest room I had built. We walked back downstairs in silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the oven, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs wrapping around us. I motioned for everyone to take their seats at the long table I had set up in the dining room, a table that had cost me nothing but hours of sanding and staining after buying it second-hand. I wanted them to see, with every detail, what work looks like. I sat at the head, where I could see every single face. No one spoke at first. Forks scraped softly against plates as we began to eat. It was almost eerie, the way the house seemed to listen to them. For a while, I said nothing either. I just watched them, their eyes darting around the room, at the way the walls looked freshly painted, at the crown molding I'd installed myself, at the simple, neat place settings. Everything here had been done by my own hands, and they all knew it. Finally, my uncle cleared his throat. "This place, it's really something," he said, his voice low, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. I nodded. "Thank you. It's been a long year." Linda hadn't touched much of her food. She sat stiffly, her fork resting on the edge of her plate. Every so often, she glanced at me, as if expecting me to throw her words back at her in front of everyone. But I didn't. I didn't need to. The house was doing it for me. Halfway through the meal, my cousin finally whispered, "I can't believe this is yours." I smiled. "I can." And then, for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something across his face, a kind of respect I had never seen there before. The rest of the dinner went on with small talk, but the usual tone of superiority, the dismissive jokes, they were gone. In their place was a different kind of quiet, one that comes when people realize they misjudged you, and now they have to sit with it. I watched them eat, every bite slower than the last, as though they were all thinking the same thing: we didn't see this coming. I didn't press them. I didn't need to. I had nothing left to prove. Instead, I looked around the table, at the people who had once made me feel so small, and felt something unexpected. Calm. That night, as plates were cleared and the house grew quiet again, I saw them out the front door one by one. My parents went first, murmuring goodbyes. My cousins followed, subdued. Linda was last. She paused in the doorway, her eyes meeting mine for a moment, and I could see it, the apology she wanted to say but couldn't. I didn't wait for it. I just said, "Good night, Aunt Linda. Drive safe." And then I closed the door. When the last car pulled away and the sound of tires faded down the street, the house became still again. I leaned against the door, listening to the quiet. The dining table, now cleared, sat in the next room, a witness to what had just happened. I walked through the rooms slowly, switching off lights one by one. The living room, the study, the stairs with their polished railings, and finally that guest room upstairs, still exactly as I'd left it. Every step reminded me of how far this place, and I, had come. I thought back to that night a year ago. The clinking of cutlery. The laughter that cut me open. The way I walked out into the cold without saying a word, feeling like I had nothing left. And now? I had something that couldn't be taken away. It wasn't just the house, it was what the house stood for. It was every hour I worked when I wanted to sleep, every dollar I saved when I wanted to spend, every moment I kept going when it would have been easier to quit. Standing there, I realized something simple. I hadn't built this place to prove anything to Aunt Linda. I had built it to prove something to myself. I pulled the quilt tight on the bed in that guest room, smoothed the fabric, and smiled. Her words didn't matter anymore. Not because I'd gotten even, but because they no longer had anywhere to land. The truth is, success has a quiet sound. It doesn't need shouting or gloating. It just stands there, unshaken, while everyone else realizes they were wrong. I turned out the light and whispered into the stillness. "I'm not hopeless. I never was." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed it.